Well, do me a favor. Can you,
Let's go ahead.
they're working on him right now.
Okay.
I need you to go with this deputy, have a seat in her car. She's going to hang out.
It started like so many domestic emergencies do, with a phone call that sounded calm on the surface, almost routine. No screaming, no panic. Just a man explaining his situation, trusting that help was on the way. What no one on that line understood yet was that they were listening to a countdown. Behind that quiet voice was a closed garage door, a locked space, a situation already past the point of safety. Moments later, the tone of the call would change forever. What makes this case so unsettling isn't just the violence that followed, it's how preventable it all seems in hindsight. Multiple warnings, multiple chances to intervene, multiple calls for help, all within a single day. Each one escalated, each one documented, each one brushed past as a domestic dispute that hadn't quite crossed the legal line yet. By the time that line was crossed, it was too late. This is not a story about a crime of passion or a split-second mistake. It's about control, fear, and a slow buildup that ended in 4 gunshots heard live by a 911 dispatcher who could do nothing but listen. Tonight's story will take you through the final day of a decorated Marine, a devoted father, and a man who believed that doing the right thing would keep everyone safe, right up until the moment it didn't. By the time September 8th, 2021 began, the Turner household was already sitting on a fault line. Years of stress, unresolved conflict, and unaddressed mental health issues had slowly eroded what once looked like a strong military family. That morning didn't start with violence. It started with arguments, control, and fear quietly shaping every decision inside the house on Jenks Drive in Gulf Breeze, Florida. Collin Turner had spent most of his adult life mastering chaos. As a Marine and an explosive ordnance disposal specialist, he was trained to stay calm when everything around him was designed to kill him. That discipline didn't disappear when he left the Corps. It showed in how he spoke, how he handled conflict, and how he tried to manage a marriage that was clearly breaking apart. Collin wasn't impulsive. He wasn't reckless. And on that day, he wasn't looking for a fight. He was looking for a way out. Not forever, just long enough to protect his children and let things cool down. The tension between Collin and his wife Brie had been building for months. Friends, coworkers, and later investigators would learn that their home life had become volatile, unpredictable, and emotionally exhausting. Brie had been diagnosed earlier that year with borderline personality disorder. Therapy attempts had failed. She had been removed from multiple treatment groups. Her behavior had become increasingly erratic, and those closest to her had begun to notice alarming changes. Collin noticed everything. That morning, he discovered his MacBook, an expensive, essential tool for his studies, sitting inside the dishwasher. It hadn't been forgotten there. It had been placed there deliberately. A message. Retaliation for him turning off the Wi-Fi the night before. It wasn't about the computer. It was about power. Collin knew things were escalating. He also knew his children were absorbing every second of it. He had made a plan, a temporary one. He wanted to take the kids to Georgia to stay with his parents, not to disappear, not to abduct them, but to give everyone space and stability. A break, a pause before something irreversible happened. Brie saw the plan as betrayal. At 12:53 p.m., she made the first 911 call of the day. She told dispatchers that Collin had pushed her against a wall and thrown her to the ground. She added something else that stood out immediately. She didn't want him to take her daughter. Not our children, her daughter. Control was already the center of the narrative. When deputies arrived, the scene didn't match the urgency of her call. Collin was sitting calmly in the driveway, not hiding, not aggressive, waiting. The first thing he did was inform officers about the weapons in the home. He voluntarily removed his pistol and placed it in plain sight on the dashboard of his truck. For responding officers, this mattered. It showed awareness, responsibility, de-escalation. Collin explained what had been happening inside the house. He told them about Brie's diagnosis, about therapy failures, about the escalating behavior, about his intention to take the children to Georgia for everyone's safety. He explained that Brie had been telling the kids police were coming to save them from their father, despite no violence having occurred. The officers examined both of them. No injuries, no bruises, no evidence of an assault. With no probable cause to arrest anyone and no visible crime, deputies were forced to leave. Before they did, Collin made a statement that would later sound chillingly prophetic. It's going to be the first one who crosses the line. He understood exactly how close they were to disaster. 4 hours passed. At 5 p.m., the second 911 call came in, this time from Collin. Brie had locked him out of his own house. Inside were their children. Outside stood Collin, helpless, listening to his youngest daughter cry on the other side of the door. Brie had taken his identification, cut off his access to money, isolated him. It wasn't just emotional punishment. It was strategic. When deputies arrived again, they found Collin in the driveway holding his young daughter, trying to calm her. His demeanor was the same as earlier, controlled, exhausted, desperate to keep things from getting worse. The responding deputy told Collin something important. Legally, he had every right to enter his own home, even if it meant breaking a window. Collin didn't do it. He didn't escalate. He kept choosing restraint. Inside, Brie told a very different story. She accused Collin of manipulation and abuse, claimed he was using the children emotionally against her. Once again, there was no evidence to support her claims. Once again, officers had no legal grounds to act. As they left for the second time that day, no one knew they were driving away from a ticking clock. After deputies left, Brie eventually let Collin back inside. He went into the garage to fix damage to the door, damage caused during their earlier conflict. It was a practical task. One more attempt to restore order. When Collin stepped into the garage, Brie followed him. Then she locked the door behind him. At 6:22 p.m., Colin Turner made the third and final 911 call. His voice was calm, clear, professional. He explained that he had been locked inside the garage, that earlier she had opened the large door and then locked him in, that he was trapped. He didn't sound panicked. He sounded like a man relying on systems that had always worked before. Seconds later, the dispatcher heard the garage door open, then a gunshot. Colin's voice broke through the line. "She just shot me." 3 more shots followed. For 4 minutes, the call stayed open. For 4 minutes, no one could help him. By the time deputies arrived for the third time that day, the situation every officer fears had already happened. Colin Turner was dead on the garage floor, shot 4 times in the back. The man who had disarmed himself earlier, the man who had tried to leave peacefully, the man who had called for help 3 times. And the warning signs had all been there. Part 2 of 4. When deputies arrived at the Turner home for the third time that evening, the urgency in their movements told a story before anyone spoke. The radio traffic, the sprint to the garage, the weapons drawn, then lowered. By the time they reached Colin Turner, there was nothing left to do. He lay on the concrete floor of the garage, surrounded by blood, his body positioned in a way that immediately contradicted any claim of self-defense. 4 gunshot wounds, all to his back. No signs of a struggle inside the garage. No overturned tools. No chaos. Just a man who had been trapped, turned away, and shot. Body camera footage captured the moments that followed, and they would become some of the most damning evidence in the entire case. Brie was not hysterical in the way people often expect after a crime of this magnitude. Instead, she oscillated between shock, clarity, and something close to resignation. Almost immediately, she began confessing, without being asked. "I'm a murderer," she said. Officers tried to slow things down, to secure the scene, to ensure everyone's safety. They told her she was being detained, not arrested, standard procedure while they investigated. She rejected that. "No, you should arrest me. I killed my husband." There was no ambiguity in her words, no confusion, no mention of fear or self-defense in those first moments. Just acceptance of what she had done. What made the scene even more disturbing was what officers learned next. The children had been inside the house during the shooting. Brie had taken them to a neighbor's home immediately afterward. When officers checked on them, it became clear that at least one child, 12-year-old Kylie, had been exposed to something deeply traumatic. Her behavior, her distress, her inability to calm down, told officers that she had likely seen or heard the shooting itself. The younger children, still too small to fully understand what had happened, clung to routines and familiarity. But Kylie knew something was terribly wrong. That knowledge would stay with her long after the police lights faded. At the station later that night, the tone shifted. The woman who had openly confessed at the scene was gone. In her place sat someone trying to regain control of the narrative. Brie told detectives that Collin had attacked her, that he had pushed her into a doorway, thrown her to the ground, threatened her, called her names. She framed the shooting as a moment of desperation, a woman finally snapping after years of abuse. But her story began to unravel almost immediately. There were no injuries on her body, no bruises, no marks consistent with being pushed or thrown. The crime scene told a completely different story than the one she was trying to sell. Then detectives told her about the 911 recording. They explained calmly and clearly that they had audio of Collin speaking to dispatch, that he sounded calm, that he said he had been locked in the garage, that seconds later the door opened, a shot rang out, and he said, "She just shot me." Then 3 more shots followed. The room went quiet. Brie's story collapsed under the weight of evidence she couldn't explain away. She admitted she had shot him. She stopped answering questions. She asked to call her father. On that call, she didn't claim self-defense. She didn't describe fear. She told him the truth. "I killed Collin." Even her father seemed stunned, asking why. There was no answer that made sense. As the case moved forward, the full picture of that day came into focus. 3 911 calls, multiple law enforcement responses, clear signs of escalation, and a man who repeatedly chose restraint, even when given permission to force his way back into his own home. Colin Turner had been a Marine, trained to neutralize threats, but in his own house, he refused to become one. The forensic evidence sealed it. The medical examiner testified that all 4 bullets entered through Collin's back. There was no defensive positioning, no close-range struggle, no indication that he posed any immediate threat when he was shot. This wasn't a panic response. It was an execution. The prosecution built their case brick by brick. The 911 recording, the body camera footage, the forensic evidence, Brie's own words at the scene. Each piece reinforced the same conclusion. Colin Turner was murdered because he was trying to leave with his children. For nearly 3 years, Brie waited for trial. Her defense team prepared a battered spouse strategy, arguing that Collin's traumatic brain injury had made him abusive, that Brie had been living in fear, that the shooting was the tragic result of prolonged trauma. But the strategy fell apart. On the second day of trial, Brie refused to testify. Without her testimony, the defense's psychological expert was barred from offering opinions about abuse. The foundation of their case collapsed instantly. The only remaining witness was Brie's brother, whose credibility was destroyed under cross-examination when prosecutors revealed he had never mentioned key abuse allegations in his original statements. The jury was left with evidence, not stories, and the evidence was overwhelming. After more than 4 hours of deliberation, the verdict came back. Guilty of first-degree premeditated murder. The sentence was mandatory. Life in prison without the possibility of parole. As Brie stood in court, she said nothing. But the silence that mattered most wasn't hers. It was the silence left behind in a garage where a father made one last phone call, trusting that help would arrive in time, because every system he believed in had worked before. This time, it didn't. After the verdict was read and the courtroom settled into stunned quiet, the focus shifted to the people who would carry the consequences long after the cameras left. 3 children, 3 lives permanently altered by a single evening that should never have reached the point it did. For Collin Turner's parents, Donald and Terry, the trial had been a brutal exercise in restraint. They sat through hours of testimony describing their son's final moments, listening to audio they could never unhear. They learned details no parent should ever know: how calm Collin sounded, how he tried to explain, how he trusted the system until the very end. When the guilty verdict was announced, it wasn't celebration that washed over them. It was a kind of hollow relief. Justice, yes, but justice that arrived far too late. The sentencing was swift. Under Florida law, first-degree premeditated murder carries only one punishment: life in prison without the possibility of parole. No discretion, no reduction, no future release. When given the opportunity to speak, Brie declined. No apology, no explanation, no acknowledgement of the children left behind. The judge imposed the sentence, and just like that, the case that had begun with a calm 911 call ended with a cell door closing for good. But outside the courtroom, the damage continued to unfold. John Patrick and Lainey, still young enough to ask questions they shouldn't have to ask, went to live with their grandparents in Georgia. The people who once worried about weekend visits now found themselves raising children who woke up from nightmares, who flinched at loud noises, who asked questions about guns with a seriousness no child should carry. Kylie, older and painfully aware of what she had witnessed, went to live with her biological father. The trauma she carried was different, sharper, heavier. She had seen something that couldn't be explained away or softened with time. Reports later revealed that all three children struggled with fear. They asked their guardians if there were guns in the house. They asked if someone could hurt them too. They asked questions that revealed how deeply their sense of safety had been shattered. These were the invisible victims of the crime. In the months after the trial, questions began to surface, not just about Brie's guilt, but about everything that led up to that day. 3 911 calls in a single afternoon, a known mental health diagnosis, prior police responses, a reported suicide attempt, repeated warning signs that, individually, may not have crossed legal thresholds, but together painted a picture of imminent danger. Law enforcement had followed procedure. Each time they assessed the scene, looked for evidence, and acted within the limits of the law. But procedure doesn't always equal prevention. And in this case, the system responded to events. It never interrupted the trajectory. Colin Turner did everything society tells people to do in a domestic crisis. He de-escalated. He communicated clearly. He disclosed weapons. He sought help. He avoided force even when legally permitted. And still, he died. That reality made the case resonate far beyond Gulf Breeze. Veterans groups, domestic violence advocates, and mental health professionals as the years pass, the question that lingers isn't whether justice was served in the courtroom, it's whether justice could have been served earlier, before a garage door opened, before 4 shots echoed, before 3 children lost their father in the space of seconds. That question has no verdict. The final chapter of this story doesn't belong in a courtroom transcript or a sentencing order. It lives in the quiet spaces afterward, the empty garage, the unanswered questions, and the lives that continue in the shadow of what happened on September 8th, 2021. When the headlines faded, what remained was a truth that feels uncomfortable precisely because it's so familiar. This wasn't a stranger danger case. It wasn't sudden, unpredictable violence. It was a slow burn, control tightening over time, warning signs stacking up, moments where intervention felt close but never quite crossed the legal threshold. The tragedy didn't erupt out of nowhere. It unfolded step by step, in plain sight. Colin Turner trusted systems because systems had always worked for him. The military taught him that protocol saves lives, that calm communication matters, that escalation should always be the last resort. On that day, he followed those principles to the letter. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't force his way into the house. He didn't threaten. He didn't arm himself. He called for help, repeatedly, believing that clarity and cooperation would keep everyone safe. That belief, tragically, was misplaced. What makes this case so devastating is not just how it ended, but how close it came to ending differently. 3 police responses in one day, multiple opportunities to recognize a pattern instead of isolated incidents, a mental health crisis that had already triggered emergency responses in the past, a household where control had replaced partnership, where fear had replaced communication. Yet each moment taken alone fell just short of decisive action. This is where many families fall through the cracks, not because no one cares, but because the system is designed to respond to evidence of harm, not inevitability. Law enforcement can't arrest on instinct. Courts can't sentence on fear. Mental health resources often arrive after damage has already been done. And when all of those realities collide inside one home, the cost can be irreversible. For the children left behind, life didn't reset after the verdict. Their understanding of safety was altered permanently. Normal childhood questions were replaced with hyper-vigilant ones. Not, can I go outside? But, is there a gun in the house? Not, when is mom coming home? But, can this happen again? Trauma doesn't disappear because a sentence is handed down. It lingers in behaviors, in dreams, in the way children learn to interpret the world. Colin's parents didn't just lose a son. They inherited a mission they never expected, raising children while grieving one. They became both caretakers and protectors, trying to provide stability while carrying the knowledge of exactly how their son spent his final moments. There's no manual for that kind of loss. And then there's the broader question this case forces us to confront. How many people are living inside similar pressure cookers right now? Homes where one partner controls access to money, identification, or children. Where emotional retaliation replaces communication. Where threats are subtle enough to avoid legal consequences, but constant enough to suffocate. Where the person trying to de-escalate becomes the most vulnerable one in the room. Colin Turner wasn't reckless. He wasn't naive. He was methodical, thoughtful, and protective. If someone like him, trained for crisis, disciplined under pressure, deeply committed to doing things the right way, could be trapped and killed in his own garage, then the danger isn't limited to any single demographic or personality type. This case isn't about vilifying mental illness, nor is it about excusing violence. It's about recognizing patterns early, taking threats of control seriously, and understanding that calm situations can still be lethal. Sometimes the absence of chaos is what allows danger to move undetected. Collin survived war zones. He survived explosives. He survived injuries that ended a career he loved. What he couldn't survive was a domestic situation where control, fear, and timing converged in the worst possible way. His story matters not because of how it ended, but because of what it warns us about. If you or someone you know feels trapped, isolated, or controlled, especially in ways that don't always look dramatic or violent, that discomfort is worth listening to. Waiting for proof can mean waiting too long. Intervention doesn't always come with sirens. Sometimes it starts with someone taking a situation seriously before it explodes. And as viewers, listeners, and witnesses to these stories, we also have responsibility. We remember Colin Turner not just as a victim, but as a father who chose family over status, peace over escalation, and responsibility over pride. A man who believed that staying calm and doing the right thing would protect the people he loved, even when it cost him his life. If this story moved you, disturbed you, or made you think differently about how domestic danger can look, don't let it end here. Share it so others recognize the warning signs sooner. Talk about it with the people you care about. And if you want more stories told with honesty, depth, and respect for the victims involved, take a moment to support the channel. Like the video if it mattered to you. Subscribe if you want to stay with these stories from start to finish. And share it, because awareness is often the first step toward prevention. Colin Turner deserved to grow old watching his children grow up. The least we can do is make sure his story isn't forgotten.